Thank you, Christopher. So this webinar series is organized by Cyclones. Cyclones is an independent nonprofit think tank working on at the intersection of climate change, sustainable development, and resilience building, with a focus on bridging the gap between policy and practice. Supporting inclusive and right-based approaches and engaging with diverse stakeholders from international negotiations to local communities across the world is our mandate. So as we all know, South Asia is one of the world's most climate vulnerable regions, facing repeated escalating disasters like floods, droughts, cyclones that threatens already fragile livelihoods and ecosystems. Access to finance and support for climate-related loss and damage is an essential, not just in principle, but in practice, especially for the vulnerable communities at local level. So this webinar is a part of series of activities under Cyclones Trust Work Program on Climate Finance and Loss and Damage, aimed at deepening both thematic and procedural understanding of how we can ensure that those are most vulnerable at the local level are not left behind. One of our key focuses is on exploring the pathway in promoting equitable access to finance. Today, we are here to share some experiences, identify challenges, and explore good practices as well. We also aim to link our evidence to policy processes, particularly under the UNFCCC, including the Fund for Responding Loss and Damage, FRLD, other relevant financing arrangements like GEF and GCF, as well as the broader context of the new collective quantified goal on climate finance. Just yesterday, as part of this ongoing series, we actually hosted the webinar focusing on Latin America region, and we are excited to continue building this dialogue with stakeholders we have here today from South Asia. So with that, I'd love to welcome first panelist for her intervention. First, we will hear from Dulanga Vitharange, acting country director of Cyclones Sri Lanka. Ms. Vitharange will share a case study on local level access to climate finance in Sri Lanka, highlighting some opportunities and persistent challenges that we have found from the work at local level. Ms. Dulanga, over to you.
Thank you, Shivaz. Let me share my screen. I hope you can see it now. Can someone please confirm?
Yes, we can your screen. Thank you.
Great. Hi, everyone. So I will talk a bit about local level access to finance in Sri Lanka, a case study particularly on the agriculture sector. So if you take Sri Lanka, it's just giving you a country profile here. Sri Lanka has close to 22 million in terms of population. And out of that, agriculture sector plays a crucial role in our economy, contributing significantly to our GDP and also employment. Over 30% of the country's employed workforce is from the agriculture sector, and it's the primary mode of livelihood, particularly for those out of Sri Lanka, out of the Colombo in rural areas. And even though agriculture is so important to our economy, we are already facing, I think, food insecurity in the country, and climate change is threatening our crops. It's also threatening water availability and the agricultural output. Interestingly, over 80% of the country, in terms of population, lack adaptive capacity to disasters. So that is the setting in which we operate here in Sri Lanka. And how we operate here in Sri Lanka are in three different sectors. We work in agriculture and food systems. We work in tourism and also fashion and apparel. And across these three sectors, we look at entrepreneurship as a cross-cutting thematic area. Taking you through climate disaster risk finance and insurance here in Sri Lanka. So key institutions for CDRFI in the country include one, the public and private finance sectors. Then we have insurance sectors. Then we have agencies in DRR, climate change, sustainable development, and also agriculture. And looking at the policy environment, policies and plans related to climate include provisions that are related to risk transfer, we have insurance-based solutions, and we also have other financial instruments. And that also includes NDCs. So our NDCs include commitments that are related to CDRFI solutions, particularly in food systems, and also cross-cutting considerations that connect to L&D. In terms of our national adaptation policy, it refers to CDRFI, particularly for food systems, and is also a cross-cutting consideration at the moment. Then I will talk a bit about the current sources of finance. In terms of the current sources of finance, the biggest source at the moment is our national budget allocation. After that, we do currently have a provision from the Finance Act to implement a crop levy that should be paid to the National Insurance Trust Fund that is operational at the moment. Then there is also an automatic premium collection system that is there, particularly for farmers who are accessing subsidized fertilizer. On top of that, we also have reinsurance mechanisms in place, so that is both internal and external also. Looking at CDRFI systems, I'm not sure how clear the picture is, but if you look at the current CDRFI ecosystem, it includes a crop insurance mechanism that has been running since 1958. Currently, it is overseen by the Agriculture and Agrarian Insurance Board, as well as the National Insurance Trust Fund. This particular insurance has two components to it. It has a compulsory insurance for 6 particular crops, and also an additional add-on of a limited amount of voluntary scheme, which includes a few other crops as well. And there is also a national natural disaster insurance scheme that is running, which is also operated by the NITF, and is also complemented by a loan protection scheme, particularly for paddy. That is in terms of current finance and also the CDRFI systems that are currently in place, particularly at local level for our farmers. If you look at the challenges, and these challenges at local level, we have come to this after years and years of research. These are some of the challenges that we found out. So the first one is the local capacity for understanding risk and developing projects. We understand that this has been a big gap in Sri Lanka. It also adds on to the lack of administrative standards that we have, because it complements proposal development in a big way, and this hinders that entire process. There's transparency issues within the system, and these entities result in accountability issues when taking on projects and developing projects as well. There is also another significant gap when it comes to accessing local data. And this data needs to be accurate. There isn't enough digitized data that is freely available. And Sri Lanka also currently lacks a data sharing policy, which inhibits the process. And in terms of I think the last point here is that looking at flexibility and long-term funding and sustainable funding, because what we see is that there is always allocations earmarked, but it's not always complementing localized challenges. So these are the 4 points that, or the 5 points that we have under this. And I will also now go through some of our key recommendations. The first recommendation that we have is mostly along the line of local capacity of actors, developing that, particularly in areas such as access to finance, understanding risk, understanding insurance, and climate literacy. And then we have building innovation or incentivizing innovation. So building innovation has been something that we've tried and tested as well. This, in our opinion, needs to come from the way of hubs or regional hubs and sharing CDRFI solutions through local change agents, particularly in certain areas where we have seen some farmers who do use CDRFI. And that is where we that is how we say that local change agents play a significant role here. In terms of inclusive processes, here we are looking at gender responsive financial access, particularly for rural women in Sri Lanka. They need it because accessing finance for them requires collateral, which makes it one step harder than their male counterparts to get financial access. So that's another area that we're looking at in terms of recommendations. One more is a complete mindset shift. This we're referring to across the education system because the curriculum needs to include climate change, risk, financial literacy, insurance literacy, which is currently not covered across the board. And the final one, I will go to a bit more detail in my next slide as well, is on multi-actor partnerships. Multi-actor partnerships promote sharing data and ideas instead of working in silos, which is quite common in the local context. And how we do this is currently we work with local authorities and also regional hubs, like I mentioned. This is particularly for local level planning. And on the other side, we also build loss and damage evidence, which is required in terms of documentation in order to access finance. So that is another thing that we do, which supports in innovative insurance development and instrument development also. So the multi-actor partnerships in that way support both local level planning and innovative instruments. So this is some of the work that we do here in Sri Lanka. But what we have done here is linked one of the knowledge products that we have. But if you go through, I think the Knowledge Hub, there's a lot more that we do, particularly in the other sectors as well. So I do encourage you to go through it. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to go through it during our discussion as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tange. So for that context setting for Sri Lanka's financial mechanisms that is out there and some practices that is being followed at the local level, as well as the recommendations for the gaps that you have identified from the research. So one of the points that you touched upon was the inclusive process and the multi-actor partnership, as well as the transboundary nature of the effects that cascades to the region, which is not only isolated to a particular country also. So with that, I'd love to move to next presentation. So we welcome Ms. Lam Dorji, Managing Director of Center for Environment and Development in Bhutan and an independent consultant. Mr. Dorji has worked with us to develop a regional case study on transboundary impacts of loss and damage in South Asia, and will share his insights from Bhutan and the region. Mr. Dorji, over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, panelists, as well as those that are attending this session online. I'm Lam Dorji, and as already mentioned, the reason I'm here is because I've done some work with Slyken Trust earlier on transboundary loss and damage in South Asia. I'd like to begin by maybe getting a closer understanding about loss and damage. Loss and damage is the ultimate reason, I think, behind the entire process of climate change negotiations and all the efforts that are going into addressing climate change. Had it been the case that adverse effects of climate change are within the capacity of communities to mitigate or cope with, I don't think climate change would be a challenge to the extent it is now. So in that context, loss and damage pretty much refers to the adverse effects of climate change that cannot be avoided through the mitigation and adaptation efforts that are currently in place and the capacity of communities to deal with it. So in a way, I find it ironic that it took so long for this loss and damage to be recognized as an important climate issue in the climate negotiations. It took so long. But in another way, it is also understandable that there have been reservations and resistance to accepting it solely because of the complexity of the issue itself and the scale of resources required to address it. So I believe it is solely because of this enormity of the issue and the resources required that it took very long for climate negotiations to acknowledge loss and damage and to put in place the mechanisms to address it. So the scale of the issue of the climate loss and damage can pretty much be deduced from what we hear every now and then in the news and from frequent reports about hazards that bring about irreversible damage to ecosystems, human settlements, and infrastructure. So, narrowing down to South Asia in the context of loss and damage, we can, I'm sure everybody agrees that South Asia is one region in the world that manifests the scale and complexity of this LND. The amount of, the extent of LND suffered by the region is very significant owing to its geographical vulnerabilities, high population density, and reliance on climate-sensitive economies like agriculture, forestry, fishery. So from that point of view, the key drivers of loss and damage in South Asia are especially the extreme weather events that have become quite noticeable in recent years. The experiences about frequent cyclones, floods, heat waves, all leading to extensive loss of life, property, and infrastructure. That is one very pertinent event that keeps occurring. And then sea level rise, of course, our coastal areas in the Indian subcontinent, the Maldives, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, all face this risk of inundation, displacement, and the issue of saltwater intrusion and other effects on the agriculture sector. Another very important aspect of this loss and damage is the glacial melt and GLOF. Especially in the Hindu Kush Himalayas, the Eastern Himalayas, I think this aspect of glacial melt has been, recorded and proven, and therefore its effect on water resources in downstream regions, and more in terms of also the flooding, especially glacial lake outburst floods. Then there is also the ecosystem degradation, especially in the mountain areas of Nepal, Bhutan. We have been experiencing the spring water sources drying up, and even wetland areas also diminishing, which are very important sources of water supply for our mountain communities. And also in terms of the climate change impact on the ecosystem themselves, the shifting in agroecological zones and the impacts on local livelihoods. Then if we look more from the perspective of the transboundary, I mean, the impact that transcend national boundaries, I would say one of the major vulnerability of the region comes from its economic connectivity. In the event of and climate event, how this connectivity would affect various economic aspects of communities across the region. And also, we have the interconnected landscapes and ecosystems, the river basins that transcend our national boundaries, and floods, especially in the mountain areas, flash floods because of the cloudbursts and the extreme rainfall. We have these problems that ultimately transcend beyond our boundaries and affect livelihoods and settlements downstream, especially in from, let's say, from Bhutan and Nepal down, affecting the floodplains of India. Then in terms of the glacial melt, sea level rise, I've already mentioned about how this is affecting human livelihoods. There are several publications, studies that have been done on the impacts of climate change, especially in terms of the transboundary loss and damage, and has been recorded as being very significant in terms of the region, I mean, global regions, especially South Asia. And the ultimate impact, leading to migration and displacement. It is said that about 90% of South Asia's displacement, disastrous displacement, were triggered by floods. In Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India, they are affected most. And about 62 million people in South Asia are projected to be forced to migrate due to climate disasters. So these are some of the aspects of transboundary loss and damage aspects of South Asia. So my view on the challenges confronting L&D in addressing it and the financing aspect, I think the L&D aspect of the financing part of it, I think it's still being developed. At the same time, I also feel that in the region, especially South Asia, we are not as well coordinated. There is a lack of coordination. I would think that it would be most appropriate for the SARC to really coordinate and bring about this mechanism of collaboration and coordination within the region. We do have these political differences and limiting the efficacy of funding mechanisms purely because we are unable to unite and present a more consolidated position as far as loss and damage is concerned. And also the complexity itself. Loss and damage, of course, if we leave it loosely, almost everything that happens these days can be easily related to climate change. But at the same time, what proportion of the loss and damage is attributable to climate change? Those sort of questions arise when it comes to the complexity of the subject. And what percentage of the required resources should come from, this climate funding, the fund for responding to climate, to loss and damage. That's the complexity part, and I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to define and to add clarity to as to how to really relate loss and damage to the loss and damage funding. Then there's also the element of loss and damage, the insufficient funding. Loss and damage financing is aimed at addressing the consequences of the events that exceed our capacity and to prevent or adapt, especially cyclones, prolonged droughts, and destruction to our ecosystem. These are very areas that require very huge financing, and therefore, it's if you look at the current global pledges, they remain way below what is actually necessary. So that is one of the major concerns. There's a lot of debate and thing, but ultimately, will the financing come? Will there be adequate resources to really address it? Or are a lot of the resources going to be spent in the process and in defining things and ultimately where the damages are actually occurring, that the funding is not adequate to address them? Then there are also the aspects of access and accountability where bureaucratic hurdles, the process, as I was saying, and then the criteria, which we have already experienced even under other climate financing. So such stringent hurdles and criteria could be, another a setback to loss and damage financing, access to finance. And there is also this aspect of accountability. Will funds actually finally flow down to where they are supposed to be? And if they do, will they be that level of transparency and appropriateness in terms of the use of the funds. So those aspects, I think, are still very important and needs to be defined at regional, national, as well as subnational levels, where such activities are expected to be implemented. So from that perspective, I think of course, there are so many recommendations and things that we could do, but some of the few that I have prioritized relate to strengthening regional cooperation, then advocacy at the global. I think South Asia, yes, this is one region that requires most attention, but at the same time, we need to present a more united advocacy at the global level. And then, of course, we also need to prioritize capacity building, this understanding the concept itself and the funding mechanisms and the implementation and reporting and all that, which needs to be understood all at the level of implementation. So that's what I've put together for this thing. So if there are specific questions, I'll be happy to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Loji. So I'd encourage participants to put your questions if you have any on the chat. We'll take all the questions after the lineup of speakers' presentations. So there were some interesting points made by Ms. Doji. So from at the start, he alluded to the fact that how long it took L&D mechanisms to be recognized and acknowledged in the UNFP process and the international level itself. So that is something we are going to touch upon at a later in one of our later speakers presentation. Before we go to that, I'd love to welcome Mr. Palash Das, technical expert at Cyclones Trust, to provide a regional perspective and to speak to community level considerations in South Asia, especially touching upon the advocacy element that Mr. Doji alluded to in his presentation. Mr. Palash, that's all.
Can you hear me, Shifas?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Shifas, and it's good to see my old friends and Lam. Thank you. It's an excellent submission. So from my end, I'll not be touching basically all the challenges what you already know. I'll be basically sharing my views from community perspective at South Asia level. I mean, to me, like at South Asia level, some of the communities we look like homogeneous, but we are not. And we do say some issues very common issues, and also some of the things, some challenges we need to really tackle together the moment we think of community access to L&D. As Dulanga also mentioned, and Lami also mentioned, some of the areas, some of the challenges are really related to say the transparency, communities, the capacity, and so Shifas, I'm just thinking my slides are on and I can't see it here.
Yeah, Christopher, would you mind sharing the slides from your end?
Yes, I'll do.
Thank you.
Maybe we can go straight to the second slide. I can't see on my screen the slides, so I don't know which one is. So okay, let me continue then. Okay, maybe the next one, yeah. The next slide. I think this is, well, I will start from here. As I was saying is that since it is from the community perspective, so from that angle, the moment we see all the climate related interventions in South Asia and over the last 15-20 years, I do see there are three main issues, and you will see more I'll be focusing on three kind of issues, because I was trying to really narrow down the whole prioritization or the priorities. So here on this slide, over the last 15-20 years, what we are seeing is that three areas we do see some good results. And first one is seriously enhance capacities, not only at the community level, but also at meso level, at national level. And the second one is related to, say, institutional development. And throughout this process, basically, we have seen some of the areas in relation to dealing with the climate change financing, and so we do see some improvement there, and some institutional capacity are really visible. And third is that knowledge integration. I mean, the knowledge is the way, all the practices, the traditional practices, and also over a period of time, what you have gathered, I do see lots of integration there. People and the communities and the climate change folks, the development folks, they have been trying to integrate knowledges there. So these are the three areas we do see some good results. But having said that, the moment we talk of community integration in relation to access to climate finance or any finance at the community level, the 5 key things or issues we need to really focus on, which are here at the bottom of the slide. So it's basically that empowerment, the collaboration and involvement, then the consultation and inform. The moment you put all of these 5 things together, there are lots of those areas we need to really focus on in coming days and months when it is about community access to finance. So these are the 3 main issues as of now. Moving on, the next one, next slide. Now, I would like to also share with you the 3 existing dominant factors that we do see in South Asia. First one is the vulnerability cycle. I mean, so far we know there is a poverty vicious cycle. Now, I mean, all the time we talk about poverty and inequality, but when it is about climate change, we do see a climate vulnerability cycle. So that's a new cycle, specifically last 5-6 years. That is really a dominant factor in the at the community level, mostly in the rural parts of South Asia. And that particular new cycle is really it's super intense. And the pace is really strong. The second one is the highly centralized financial related kind of flow. I mean, the moment you think of the finance flow from central to, say, community level, we do see it's really centralized. I mean, though we have seen some improvement, as I have shown in my earlier slide, that some improvement at the local level, some institutional capacity exists there, but not necessarily that has addressed the whole centralized process, that particular issue. So we have I have basically looked into 32 key program across South Asia, and out of that, what you have found is that only 32% existing program are really focusing on the community level issues. And the moment you think of that real population at the community level is only 4.8% at I mean in South Asia. So the predominant factor is still highly centralized system. The third is that it's no and less alignment. And when I'm saying that no and less alignment, that means maybe to some extent we're addressing that vulnerability cycle. Maybe to some extent we are trying to reach communities, but it's still it's a big issue there the moment you talk of alignment when it is about diversity and inclusion. I mean, somehow we are missing to include them in the whole process. As a result, even the allocation is there, even to some extent that the communities are having some resources, access to some resources, but misallocation is there at the community level. It's not reaching, it's not addressing properly the diversity and inclusion. So the 3 good things and 3 existing dominant factors in South Asia at the community level, the moment you put this together, so what we can really expect when you talk about the community access to say the climate finance. Next slide, please. Okay, this is there I wanted to come up with a frame showing is that basically on the left hand side up that when say there is a whole cycle, and that means where, I mean, it doesn't really matter at what level you'd like to do this kind of or look at this, the assessment. Every time we need to really think of these 3 key factors, that the cycle, the new cycle, and that should be part of of any assessment. The second is that when it is about the resource allocation, perhaps the decisions are being taken at the national level. But the moment it is about the distribution, then we need to really come up with a whole decentralization process, and that should be linked to it, the factor first. Now the factor three, left below, so it's all about inclusion and diversity. And here I am proposing is that we need to really have something in place, which is called vulnerability-based targeting systems. If we don't have that, we may reach some communities, but may not be able to identify the real target groups or the geographic areas. So these three factors we should put together so that we can really ensure that community access to the climate finance. So this is a framework I think we should be taking forward. Next slide, please. Having said that, it's not, we have also identified some of the good practices are happening across South Asia in many places. I did not mention here the countries, but say from Pakistan to say Bangladesh to Sri Lanka, we do see some of the approaches are really working there. One of the good thing is that the first approach what we picked up is that it's basically developing something around community, and we do see some good results there, say direct community grants or community accessible trust funds, and that is really working there. Not necessarily addressing all of the issues to ensure the community integration, but we do see some good results there. The second one, what is really working is to a large extent is like microfinance, mainly for adaptation related intervention, and second is the more or less similar is the community revolving funds, and that is also I think is working mostly in India, in Bangladesh, and to some extent in other countries too. So these are the two good things as of now in South Asia, to some extent addressing some of the challenges what other colleagues already mentioned in relation to ensuring community access to climate finance. Next one. Then we thought of, let's see, if you put everything together, what would look like, say, a good community level intervention, considering the South Asia context. And I did not mention here the country here also, but let me mention here, this is what something it's happening in one of the districts in Bangladesh, in Dinajpur. It's a community revolving fund. It's a cooperative structure, and to some extent, it's really working there and addressing some of the issues in relation to say transparency, in relation to say accountability, in relation to say also the sources of funds. And also control over resources. So I will not be going into detail of this, but I'd be happy to take answer later. But this is giving a sense that we may adopt this kind of thing. Moving on, the next one, next slide. Here is basically some of the innovative ideas we are thinking we should. This is still working. We are seeing that's on the ground right now. Some of the ways to address the transparency and also increasing resilience. For instance, we are thinking of how to have digital system in place, and say mobile wallet integration, say blockchain for transparency. And also some of the say securities in a sense the insurance, so community level insurance, resilience vouchers, yes, and micro insurance. So these are the things are working right now. We are seeing some good results, and this could be a good case study in relation to addressing some of the challenges what communities are facing right now. But having said that, is it enough? I think my colleague Lam and also Dulanga, the way that you mentioned, we may need to have something say a good force in relation to doing more advocacy at the local level, at the national level, at the regional level. And second, also maybe we need to focus on some of the target areas across the countries and some transboundary issues. Moving on, the next slide. Again, my key takeaways, three is again applying the community access, that particular lens. The first one is that the vulnerability cycle and decentralization and diversity and inclusion, we don't have any other option to see the whole thing in isolation. The moment you talk about doing any sort of assessment, these three things should be seen together. Do you have the capacity, or do you have this aptitude to take it on board? I think if it is not there, we have to push for it. No assessment I have not seen yet covered all these three areas. The second point is again about, I think Dulanga mentioned it very clearly, the whole data issues. If you don't have data, if you don't have community involved, at some point of time, we are basically failing ourselves. So anything if it is for community, that should be, say, community-led, purpose-driven, and something the quantifiable impact metrics. And this is very much possible. I mean, we do see it is possible, but we have to make it a kind of a policy call, and maybe practice changes. Finally, the last one is that the local government institution and the local agencies, knowing fully that in South Asian context, the local agencies and LGIs, not necessarily they are working together. And it's important to have a marriage between these two. And that may address some of the issues related to decentralization and related to, say, applying vulnerability-based index to identify the right kind of groups to ensure inclusion and diversity. So these are the three key takeaways, I think, for us at the South Asia level, considering, say, having enhanced community access to climate finance. So I will stop here. I'm not touching all of these L&D processes, and so I think my other colleagues will touch those. Thank you, Shifaz.
Thank you, Palash. So Palash touched upon the bottom-up approach that we need and the experiences that he has garnered from the work that he has been doing at the ground level as well. And at the same time, we got Mr. Vitarnaga's presentation from Sri Lanka, where country-specific context, how it has been sort of taken into consideration. And same when it came to Mr. Doji's presentation, the cascading nature of the impacts that because of the close connections that cascades down to the other countries, and the where it becomes a transboundary issue rather than an isolated issue. So with that, we have Miss Eileen Niaz, a program and research associate at Cyclones Trust, who has been engaging with the UNFP process for a long time with the Maldivian government. So she'll try to give an overview how the UNFP process has been looking into this, and how these have been informed the process, and the linkages to the broader frameworks. Miss Niaz, over to you.
Thank you very much, Shifaz. Let me try to share my screen. Sorry about the slow process.
If you want, yeah, happy to share the screen for you.
Yes,
yeah.
please. That would be awesome.
First of all, it would be lovely if you could do that.
Yeah. Thank you. Can we move on to the next slide? So yeah, I will try to give a very high level overview of the financing mechanism of the UNFCCC. So starting with the convention itself, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is an outcome of the Earth Summit that was held in Rio in 1992. I guess long before many of the participants here were born. The ultimate aim of the convention is to prevent dangerous human interference with the climate system. And This was followed by the adoption of the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, which is another step towards implementation of the overarching framework of the convention and had binding emission targets for developed countries. So the UNFCCC agreement and the Kyoto Protocol both classify participant countries into annexers, and the countries in the annex are generally the developed countries, and non-annex countries are the developing countries. And then the Paris Agreement was negotiated and adopted in 2015 as a measure to identify the measures to implement the actions post 2020 after the end of the second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol was set to expire in 2020. And the overall goal of the Paris Agreement is to the text, according to the text of the agreement, the goal is to limit warming to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, but based on subsequent reports of scientists, it has now become more accepted that the goal is to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And the Paris Agreement is a process where countries develop increasingly ambitious emission reduction targets through 5-year cycles, which are presented in their nationally determined contributions, or also known as NDCs. And the third round of NDCs were due to be submitted by parties in February this year. This would identify their actions up to 2035, but from what the Secretariat has received so far, it seems like only 22 parties, which is just 21% of parties, have submitted their NDCs so far. So we can hope that more people are working on developing them in time for COP. Next slide, please. Yeah. So on the financial mechanism of the convention, both the convention and the subsequent agreements provide a framework to provide financial, technical, and capacity building support for developing countries to implement the goals and of their goals under the agreement. So in the UNFCCC convention itself, industrialized nations agreed to support climate action in developing countries, and this was reaffirmed in the Paris Agreement, where the so in the Paris Agreement there is no annexes defining developed and developing countries, but parties are generally regarded at the point when they ratify the agreement whether they are developed or developing country. And so in the Paris Agreement, developed countries reaffirmed their lead in continuing to provide support and encourage other parties who can afford to do so to also provide support to those in need. And the support provided is sent through, I was reading the comment. So yeah, the support provided is through the operating entities of the financial mechanism, which I will talk about a little bit in more depth later on. And then there is a process under the Paris Agreement where through the enhanced transparency framework of the agreement, countries report on the climate action they are undertaking, and also the support provided for those who provide. And then for recipient countries, they report on the support needed and received as well. And the information contained in these reports are reviewed through a multilateral process. And the outcomes of these information, this synthesized information feeds into a global stocktake process to where the collective progress towards the long-term goals of the Paris Agreement is measured. And the first GST took place in 2023 in the UAE COP, where parties unfortunately concluded that we are not yet on track to reach the Paris Agreement's temperature goal of 1.5 degrees, or we are not yet on track to achieve climate resilience, or we are not aligning all of our climate finance flows towards climate resilient and low emission development as aimed under the Paris Agreement. Yeah, next slide, please. So, how much finance is needed for parties to meet their climate goals? So based on just the costed needs provided by recipient developing country parties in their NDCs, an amount of roughly 455 to 584 billion is needed per year until 2030 to implement just the costed portions of their NDCs. And similarly, the UNEP tells us that annually, we will need between 215 to 387 billion per year until 2030 to meet adaptation needs. So we are talking about huge numbers here. And so when we consider the ambition, in COP16 in 2010, developed countries pledged to provide 100 billion per year, to mobilize 100 billion per year USD in climate finance by 2020 to support developing countries. And then this goal was extended later until 2025. And for the period post 2025, under the Paris Agreement, a new collective quantified goal was agreed in Baku at the most recent COP29, where developed country parties agreed to take the lead towards a goal of at least 300 billion USD per year by 2035 for developing country parties' climate action. And also the decision includes another collective goal for all actors to work together to scale up climate finance to developing country parties to at least 1.3 trillion per year by 2035. And many experts say that this 1.3 trillion is actually more closer to the needs of developing countries. And so we might be wondering whether how much progress was made in meeting these goals. And the answer would depend on the source of information that you are looking at. So according to the OECD, developed country parties provided and mobilized 115.9 billion in climate finance for developing parties in 2022, which was after the original 2020 mobilization goal. But if we are to take this source, then this goal was achieved at least in 2022. But then there's also Oxfam, who does a similar assessment, and they say that no, we cannot count support provided as loans to recipient countries, and we can't count some other instruments. So we can only count grants and grant equivalents. And when they count just these sources of finance instruments, the total is more in the range of between 28 to 35 billion US dollars in 2022. Okay, can we move on to the next slide? So I will now briefly touch upon the operating entities of the financial mechanism. We have the JEF, which is now mainly supporting enabling activities, which is helping developing country parties meet their reporting obligations under the Paris Agreement and the Convention, such as reporting under the Enhanced Transparency Framework. And then there's the Green Climate Fund. Also, the JEF, through its trust fund, provides support for the climate focal area, which is mainly for mitigation. And then we have the GCF, which is the largest dedicated climate fund with currently about a 17 billion US dollar portfolio and provides support for both adaptation and mitigation. And then the adaptation fund is not officially an operating entity of the financial mechanism because it's a different fund established under the Kyoto Protocol as a channel to monetize the share of proceeds from the Kyoto Protocol mechanism. And it provides support exclusively for adaptation in vulnerable countries. And currently it serves both the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, but not the convention, and is set to exclusively start serving the Paris Agreement once the share of proceeds from the Paris Agreement Article 6 mechanism becomes effective. Yeah, can we move on? And then there is the SPCF and the LDCF, which is both managed by the JEF, which provides, the LDCF provides adaptation support exclusively for LDCs, and the SPCF has two windows, one providing support for adaptation in seeds, and another window providing technology transfer, innovation, and private sector engagement support. And then we have the fund for responding to loss and damage, which is to help support address irreversible climate impacts, and is the newest funds in the family, which came into being in 2022 at the COP27 in Sharm el Sheikh, which my colleague here is going to talk more about. Yeah, and that's the end of my presentation. Happy to take questions later on.
Thank you, Ms. Niaz. So Ms. Niaz touched upon the UNFCCC processes and as well as the financial mechanisms under process, and touched upon the conversations that was taking center stage in COP29 around the finance NCQG with whether the goal has been met or not. So I think we have the next person, next speaker in line, who is better placed to answer most of the questions as well, and while giving a quite an extensive overview to FRLD. So we have Mr. Vicente Pauliu, who is an experienced negotiator for G77 and China on loss and damage, as well as GST. He's also a senior technical expert with Slack and Trust. Mr. Yu will offer his perspective on FRLD as well as touching upon a few of the questions that has come through so far, and I already noticed that he has been active on the chat as well. Mr. Yu, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Shifaz, and good morning, friends. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. I do have a presentation, so I'll flash that up on the screen shortly. But I just wanted to sort of give you an overview of where I'm coming from. One is that, as Shifaz pointed out, I have been actively involved in the climate change negotiations over the past almost 20 years now, and I've been involved in the negotiations that led up to the creation of the Green Climate Fund, the operationalization of the Adaptation Fund, and of course the Loss and Damage Fund. One of those is, I tend to believe that the Loss and Damage Fund is one of the, I think, key successes that we've had as developing countries in the climate change negotiations, in the sense of having been able to create it despite the intense opposition from developed countries, which some of the previous speakers pointed out. So let me walk you through some of those. In the climate negotiations, I have the hat of being part of the Philippines delegation, and in that context, I worked with the G77, the group of 77, in terms of coordinating that group on the loss and damage negotiations. So let me flash my my PowerPoint up on screen, and let me know if you can see it already. Can you see it, Shifaz?
Yes, we can, but not on full screen yet.
Okay, let me just see where it is now. Hang on. There's some technical thing going on with my machine. So let me bring that up again. And is it up?
Yes, it is up. If you could present the slide.
Yeah.
Yes, now perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep,
Okay.
that's
So,
fine.
yeah. So let me just go. So I will not go through the first few slides. I mean, I think all of us here are knowledgeable about loss and damage. So I'll just skip that. This one. This is just a quick slide to show you how we tried to evolve the loss and damage architecture over the past few years. I think Mr. Dorji also pointed us to an idea. So it's taken us over, at least since we established the Warsaw, at least since the idea of loss and damage being a key part of the climate regime came out, and we started negotiating on it. It has taken us almost 15 years since then, and this is sort of like just a quick timeline over what we did there. So I was involved in negotiating the initial work program, which was under the adaptation track back in 2010. We managed to get the Warsaw International Mechanism in place by 2013, tried to operationalize that. And then, of course, you had the Paris Agreement in 2015. And then I think one of the things, and then uh, as developing country negotiators, what we had realized, I think by 2016, 2017, was that the Warsaw International Mechanism, what it was supposed to do, what it was designed and intended to do, was not sufficient for developing countries. So when we launched into the review of the Warsaw International Mechanism back in 2018, one of the things that we pressed hard our partners across the table to do was to start thinking about the idea of two things when it comes to loss and damage. One, we needed to have a technical assistance network that would provide loss and damage related technical assistance to developing countries. And second, we needed to highlight the issue of loss and damage financing. Both ideas were objected to by our developed country partners. I remember back in 2019 in Madrid. And so we, as developing countries, decided to take a staggered approach. We first tried to get the technical assistance network. So we got the mandate for that in the Santiago network back in 2019, and then spent several years, with the interruption of COVID, to try to put in place its functions and then set it up as an institution. And so it's now up and running. And then in 2021, in Glasgow, we again raised the idea of having a loss and damage finance mechanism. Pushed hard for it, got pushed back a little bit in 2021, pushed again in 2022. We got the loss and damage fund. It was negotiated, its details were negotiated, and then it was established finally in Dubai, and then spent the past year and a half then has been operationalizing it. I think Eileen pointed this out, so I will just skip that. So what we have now in terms of the loss and damage spectrum is in the climate process is that we have a policy arm and a policy discussion arm and a knowledge generation body in the Warsaw International Mechanism. So it has expert groups that are intended to help generate knowledge products. Then we have a technical assistance arm in the Santiago network, which is intended to help developing countries access technical assistance through the members of the network. So the members of the network right now would include organizations like the Red Cross, ICRC, UNDP, UNEP, different other entities. And we've been encouraging the Santiago network to make sure that it's not just these big Western organizations that are part of it, but also organizations, community organizations from developing countries become part of that network, because we believe as negotiators that our own communities have much information and knowledge that we could share as well. And then finally, we have the financing arm, which is the fund. So I'll go very quickly through what the fund is about, what it can provide, and be happy to answer more questions to it. The backdrop of this presentation is that I have been involved in negotiating the fund in the past. I'm an advisor as well to some of the members on the fund board. And in my capacity as coordinator of the G77 on loss and damage, it's one of those things. This is one of those things that I keep track of to make sure that everything in the loss and damage architecture sort of work well together. So as you know, developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change are eligible to receive resources from the fund. This was a big victory by developing countries, because when we were negotiating the mandate for the loss and damage fund back in Sharm el-Sheikh, and then during the transitional committee, our developed country partners really wanted it to be focused just on primarily LDCs and SIDS, and for us that was a non-starter as developing countries, because addressing loss and damage is not a beauty contest about vulnerability. It's about recognizing that different developing countries will have different vulnerabilities, and therefore all of us have particular vulnerabilities which need to be addressed. And so you have, this text that I put up here on the screen essentially allow us to then identify what are those developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change. And the approach that we would take, both as negotiators and our board members in the fund are saying, is that as long as a developing country has one or more of these characteristics, that developing country is therefore a particularly vulnerable developing country, and therefore is eligible to receive funding from the fund. So as far as South Asia countries are concerned, all of us in South Asia would be eligible to receive funding. So the fund's access modalities are still being developed by the board. The guidance is that, coming from the parties, is that there must be direct access for national entities. Approval processes must be simplified. There's expedited funding, and not be bureaucratic. And so the mandate for the board is to develop these kinds, that you can see on the right side of the screen, these kinds of modalities. There's direct access via direct budget support. National entities at the subnational, national, and regional entities can access it as well. There will be international access. There will be a access to a small grants program. It just hasn't been developed yet, but that is one of those things that the board is supposed to develop, and there would be rapid disbursement modalities as well. The fund is supposed to finance loss and damage broadly, and in the guiding instrument, the governing instrument, we did list down several items that they're supposed to look at when you provide financing. So it would be about climate-related emergencies, sea level rise, population movement, so climate refugees, for example. It would also fund data and information gathering, fund resilience and reconstruction and recovery. It would run the whole gamut from immediate post-disaster to longer-term recovery rehabilitation. It would also be able to fund slow onset event responses, for example. And the rightmost column here are the specific activities that the governing instrument is saying could be provided by the fund. So national response plans, information and data collection, human mobility, so population displacement, relocation, for example, and preparing for loss and damage. Different kinds of financing can be provided, primarily grants and loans. The idea, though, is to make sure that it does not increase the debt burden that developing countries are facing. And so you have those listings here, and you can see it in the governing instrument as well. How much do we currently have in the fund? Now, this is not a very nice picture. We back in Egypt and then in Dubai, developed countries pledge something around 768 million, almost 770 million US dollars. Since then, we have not seen any new pledges. what we have seen so far in terms of actual monetization agreements, meaning from pledges that were said in speeches to actual contracts with the fund, that yes, we're going to provide this amount of money to the fund. Only around 495 of that 770 million have been covered by those agreements. The total amount that has actually been paid into the fund, which is then available for the fund to disperse, is around 321 million. And these are figures that came from the latest board meeting that took place in April. And as far as the fund is concerned, the initial agreement the board took in terms of how to start disbursing the money that they actually have right now is that they have what they call an early intervention modality called the Barbados implementation modality, where the board decided that starting this year and up to next year, they would try to disburse at least $250 million to developing countries that submit project proposals to strengthen national loss and damage responses. And each project would be roughly around $5 to $20 million. So it would be extremely important for countries to start thinking about putting in place that kind of project proposal, for example. But the amount of funding is clearly way below what's needed. I think the number of $400 billion annually by 2030 is sort of like the number that that many analysts are saying, but the scale, of course, is going to be roughly around that amount. And we're not even sure whether the remaining pledged amount that's not covered by monetization agreements would in fact be delivered. For example, the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement clearly means that the amount of money they're going to give to the Green Climate Fund and to the Adaptation Fund and to the Loss and Damage Fund will not be there anymore. And other developed countries are signaling that they don't want to provide more money as well. So that is a big question. So where is it now? We have a sixth meeting coming up next month in the Philippines. The secretariat of the fund is now operational. They've got an executive director and a deputy executive director. They're hiring people, but they do have a set of decisions that they need to make sure that the money really starts flowing to developing countries, and developing countries can start applying for that money. One is to really put in place the Barbados implementation modalities, meaning agree on the application format, and then start accepting project proposal applications, and then make some decisions on approving those. They need to scale up their recruitment. They need to talk about resource mobilization. Because the amount of money really is very small and not sufficient at all. And we don't want the fund to become just a lip service fund, a tokenism fund. It needs to be a fund that really helps developing countries. And so what can we do? I think for those of us that are working with governments or advocating with governments, including in our own countries, I think we need to increase that push for developed countries to live up to their promises and their commitments to provide loss and damage financing. We need to push for a scaled up levels of loss and damage financing. And at the same time, we need to get our developing countries to be much more, I think, aggressive and much more insistent on the need for loss and damage financing by making sure that they work together in the fund, that they work together in the negotiating agenda items that we will have this Bonn and in Bonn in a couple of weeks and in Brazil. And second, we need to push our governments at home and regionally. I think one of the previous speakers mentioned SAARC, for example. We need to get our governments to work together at home and regionally to put in place national loss and damage action plans, frameworks, and strategies, because this will become very important in providing the basis for funding proposals through the fund. I've been involved in developing the ASEAN loss and damage strategy. I've also helped some other developing countries in Asia develop their national loss and damage framework and strategy. And I know it's very difficult and extremely complicated. But both domestic and regional work is going to be extremely important because we do not want to reach a point where, for example, developed country partners and other potential finance providers will say that we're willing to provide support, but we don't know what to support. And so we need to be clear as well in terms of our ideas about what we want the support for, because it needs to be needs-based, it needs to be country-driven, and it needs to be appropriate to our own national circumstances. So maybe with that, let me just end here and I'd be happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Yu. Thank you for that extensive um, overview for the overview of FRLD and the process, how it has gone on. And last month actually marked like pivotal month. We had the fifth board meeting as well as the high level dialogue last month on FRLD. So with that, we will move to an open discussion. I do see a few of the negotiators in the participants list as well as some representative from Secretariat, which is nice to see. I won't put anyone on spot, but I would welcome everyone to contribute to the discussion. But before we go there, we had received certain expression of interest to present to share certain ideas and present case studies. So if Ms. Nabeen Joshi is in with our call, I'd welcome you to present the summary on the case study on loss and damage in Kanchanpur district in Nepal. Ms. Nabeen.
Hi there, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. So far, regarding the loss and damage from Sudra Paschim province, I don't have like specifically prepared the presentation, but I will just share some of the insights from the loss and damage studies that we carried out in the western part of the Nepal. So this is the major event due to the major extreme rainfall on 7 to 8 July for 2024. That was like very unprecedented rainfall, record-breaking rainfall in Dodra station with 624 millimeter rainfall. That devastated 4 municipalities, both in terms of like economic and non-economic losses within this region, causing the agricultural land, worth the buildings, household level, agriculture fields. There was extreme, the level of damage was total in those areas, including economic and non-economic losses in these areas. So far, there is no any financial assistance on or any sort of like insurance or compensation that we have been carried that have been received to repay the recovery of these activities in these areas. I'll present briefly the total the economic losses was so much huge that it cost near about like for the local government it was like the 18% of the total municipal budget for that fiscal year. So it amounts for the very huge amount of the time with huge amount of damage for that municipality to recover. So still there is like a huge gap in our sense in Nepal as well, as we have been in an impact from the implications of the climate change. The effects are very widely and closely seen. The experiences from the Kanchanpur is one of the example. Besides it, the Melamchi flood is the another one, and there was the recent lake burst in the upper mountain areas. So, so in Nepal, we are still like getting the compensation or any sort of like loss and damage funding from the international area, and there has been like a good discussion going on how we can make the communities the assess assess with such funds. I mean, the local governments, so that the recovery process could proceed quickly and in a timely manner. They could repair what has been damaged at the ground. Mm. So I will stop in here just to provide the brief overview regarding the loss and damage that has been in in the Kanchanpur district of Nepal.
Thank you, Mr. Joshi. Thank you for sharing the experience from the ground. And to add something there, Nepal is very active on sort of disaster risk management scope in last year, like at ICI 2024. So there were like lots of mechanisms that Nepal had developed, as well as within the region, that they got together, and a dialogue, like very holistic dialogue was held. So I think there's lots of effort that is being happening in the region, and Nepal is leading that as well. With that, I'd like to pass the mic on to.
We cannot hear you, Shoes.
Sorry. I'd like to pass the mic on to Julia Theresia. She also has interested in sharing certain information. Do we have Julia? If we do not have Julia on the call, yes, Dominic, please go ahead.
Yeah,
No.
thank you for giving me the floor. What I want to know is whether the local administration, the councils, local councils can directly get access, apply for the fund without passing through the national government by using maybe the mechanism of decentralized cooperation. Is it possible to do that? I don't know. That's the first question concerning the local governments or local administrations. And then the second question concerns the regional organizations. Is it possible for regional organizations, such as I'm talking in terms considering Africa, like ECAS, ECOWAS, maybe if I mention considering Africa, SADC to apply for the fund for the benefit of their member state?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I'd love to pass the question on to one of our speakers, if anyone is prepared to take it up. Or else I can just give a quick update on that. So at the moment, the access, the decentralized system is something that is being explored. Like as Ms. Das presented, that is something that is being explored at the region as well as at individual country level. At the moment, that access system is not widely present when it comes to international mechanisms. Almost all the time, it goes through the central government, and that sort of takes some time, where the government also takes the time. So I have a piece, a better place to answer this. So I have his hand up as well.
Thank you. Maybe let me take a stab at responding to that, knowing what's sort of like been happening inside the board. One, like I said, the board is supposed to come up with access modalities that allows for direct access, including for subnational entities, and then it's supposed to put in place as well access modalities through a small grants program for local communities. They haven't done that yet. I'm not sure exactly when that will happen. Chances are it will happen next year in terms of them being able to define what those modalities are. But the mandate is there. The board is required under the governing instrument to in fact provide direct access for subnational entities as well, and through the small grants program for local communities. The question, which you rightly pointed out, is whether is what the role would be of the national, for example, national loss and damage focal points that have been nominated by countries. Are they going to be the gatekeepers? Are they going to be just for information only? That we don't know yet, and that is something that perhaps if you have ideas and suggestions, that would be useful, because then we can also reflect that in the conversation that we will have as parties in the negotiations. Many thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Vicente. So do we have any questions from the floor? We do have a couple of questions from the chat that was there from little time ago. So one question was, what are the strategies for international collaboration action towards funding loss and damage? And what are the demands that there for COP30 in Benham with regards to FRLD? So I think this would also likely go to Mr. Yu. If you want to take the question, Mr.
Sure. Let me quickly respond to that. I think if one, of course, we as developing countries need to sort of be really upfront and be very articulate in pushing for the need for international support to come our way when it comes to addressing loss and damage. But like I mentioned earlier as well, it's important that we are able to develop regional, if we can, regional or sub-regional networks to define our priorities as countries or as a region. In Africa, for example, I know that under the African Union, they have set up, or at least are discussing that within ASEAN. Our fellow neighbors in Asia, within the Southeast Asian region, they are also developing that kind of either regional strategy, or at least some kind of more regionally integrated approach towards loss and damage action at the national level, and then how they work together at the regional level, in the expectation that that will also improve both the availability and access to loss and damage financing coming from the fund and other funding sources, for example, but also improve their ability to actually make use of those funds in a way that is effective and efficient. I would imagine, I think our friends in the Caribbean, and I guess I think I've heard something about similar kinds of conversations also taking place in the Pacific. So yes, so definitely if international cooperation is going to be one of those things that you're interested in, then having a regional integration approach to that would be a key component of that. Thank you.
Thank you, see you again. So next we have another question on the chat from very interesting perspective. So this is for all the speakers. It can be taken up by anyone at any point. So given the varying economic realities with few LNDs and countries with immense economic growth and varying geographical realities, especially like mountainous countries and the SIDS, within South Asia, what opportunities exist or could be possible for regional access for loss and damage finance for South Asian countries? Are existing structures feasible for SARC or SACF? Or is it more work? Is it something that is more work is needed for a fit for purpose structure within the South Asia for climate collaboration? Or are we too different to enable regional collaboration? So I'd ask any of the speakers. Mr. Doji, maybe you could give you a bit of input from the transformative nature of the effect.
Well, that was a very long question, so I couldn't get half of it. But I feel that there is a lot of work to be done before we can access any financing, because as it is, it's not even clear the eligibility and then the application and all that. And for the region, especially the states and the high elevation countries like Nepal, Bhutan, I think it would be good to really put together, the real on the ground loss and damage information. One of the first things might be, as Vincent was pointing out, there are probably opportunities to really strengthen the data so that it can lead to maybe combined united approach to accessing the fund, or maybe even individually. But I think the priority would be more about really strengthening the case through collection of data, and really making it a point so that we can articulate it at the level of the financing. So yeah, so I think that's what I would think of in terms of responding to this question.
Mr. Das, would you want to take a crack at that? Especially since SARC collaboration is something that you touched upon.
Yes, I mean, as we all know, I think the LAM touched it. There are some issues still there at the South Asia level. We don't know, how to tackle those. But good to see that SARC Secretariat started again working on this, and they have identified some of the regional cooperation related issues. Not only on transboundary, I'll be touching some areas like, say, social protection. They are trying to come up with some kind of program through which they can tap into some of the potential, say, finances and so. So I do see some movements there, and this is really encouraging. And at the same time, what I'm seeing, at the country level, some government agencies are also coming up strongly to put forward some of the, say, regional level proposals to not only SARC, but also there is one, I think LAM can tell better, the SAF for some way that there is a particular regional pot. So they are trying to also utilize that. So, and the last month there was something, some regional level event that took place in Nepal. I don't have any update on this, but do see lots of movement right now is happening at South Asia level. So that will be from my end. Sifas?
Thank you, Mr. Das. So would you want to add any points from the context of Philippines?
Apologies, I was my microphone wasn't working. Yes, so no, in the context of the Philippines, I think what we've been trying to do, one is and our president will mention this at the board meeting coming up in a month, is that yes, we are going to be doing our homework. We're not going to be relying, I think, just on access to external financing, because I think, as Mr. Das was pointing out, we need to be able to build that case properly, that we can make use of the funding well, and that we will be able to build the capacity to do it. I think what is extremely important, and this is also something that I have picked up and understood in some of the projects I work with in Asia, for example, in Cambodia and in Mongolia, when I was asked by some agencies to help these governments develop their loss and damage frameworks, was that loss and damage policy making and actions need to be integrated into the overall, broader, I think, development priorities and frameworks that the country is operating in. Because one thing that we have to be aware of, I think, is, and then we all know this, right, is that at the end of the day, addressing climate change and the impacts of climate change is not, it's not really about just addressing climate change. It's about gearing up our entire economy, our communities, our people, the livelihoods, and everything else, the infrastructure, for example, to be more resilient and be able to do that transition effectively. And so I think one key learning that we've been picking up in the Philippines with our neighbors within ASEAN is that there has to be a closer integration between loss and damage actions and policies and the financing for that with the longer term, development trajectories that the country wants to undertake. And this is something that I know that has been, I've heard as well being discussed in the ASEAN context. So, thank you.
Ms. Nias, I see your hand up. Maybe you have something to add as well. Please do
Yes.
take it.
I just wanted to add my thoughts to Titian's question as well. So I was thinking that we don't see a lot of coordination between South Asian countries in the climate change negotiation space. For instance, we have Bhutan, not anymore, but then Nepal, who were coordinating as LDCs, and then we have India in the LMDCs group, and then Maldives in the AOCs, which I think sometimes the negotiation positions between these groups can be very diverse. So probably this is a result of the interests and priorities of some of the countries in this region being very different from each other. But having said that, I also think there is opportunity there where we could collaborate on thematic level. For instance, there seems to have been a regional effort to develop a regional drought management strategy under the UNCCD agreement. And then perhaps another area could be something like food security, where I think there is a lot of trade between the big countries in the region on food. So yeah, just putting my thoughts out there. And perhaps we could explore how we can make better use of the regional institutions like SARC and SACEP even to strengthen this collaboration. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Nias. Mr. Yu, you have another question on the chat. So basically, what are the overlaps do you see between LND regional cooperation on the implementation side, playing into adaptation GG overlaps on the measurements and the data side from a non-party stakeholders perspective?
That's an excellent question. I don't know if I'm equipped to answer that, but here's my take. Right, I think at the national level and I think broadly overall, at the end of the day, what we want to have, both as citizens and as non-parties or as stakeholders in the community that we are living in, is to make sure that one, the impacts are addressed. Second, that we are better able to prepare for incoming impacts. And third, that we are continuing to, we will be able to live in a society and an economy that provides hope for the future, that provides jobs and all those kinds of things. So from that perspective, my suggestion would be, if we are going to do any kind of advocacy or policy or policy suggestions around this area, is to really make sure that we see loss and damage and adaptation and mitigation as part of a broader spectrum of work that needs to be done in a coherent and strategic and integrated manner, targeted at enhancing the development future and development possibilities of, especially for those of us who are from developing countries, the communities and the societies that we live in. It does not make economic or rational political sense, for example, for us to sort of like, put these in silos. So my suggestion would be, in terms of overlaps, between, for example, regional work and national work, I would tend to see that not as overlaps, but more as ways in which one could enhance the synergy between what we want to do with our neighbors in the region and what we want to do nationally. And to my mind, there is a very close link between adaptation, for example, and how we measure things that we need for longer term resilience building through adaptation and the GGA, and the kind of work that needs to be done to build greater levels of capacity to address and respond to loss and damage. So again, it's a spectrum, and I've expressed this over and over again to my colleagues in the negotiations in the past. We see we call it the full spectrum of loss and damage, which ranges from preparing for the impact, so early warning, data gathering, and all that, which might implicate and involve, of course, the measurement and data one could get from looking at the GGA indicators, to immediate disaster relief, to post-disaster recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. So that's how I would see it. They are not separate. I think they are linked, and I think overlaps will be fine. But as long as we know where to put them in the overall spectrum of the work that needs to be done to make sure that there's a future for our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yu. And thank you for the question as well. I think we'll get more clear overview on this right after SBS with the workshops happening in like a couple of weeks. So if you do not have any questions or any inputs from the participants, since we have taken a little bit longer than we planned for, I'd like to invite Mr. Dennis Momba, Director, Research and Knowledge Management at Cyclone Trust, to deliver the closing remarks and provide the way forward. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to keep this very short because we're already over time, and I think we've heard a lot of very interesting and very rich discussion points. So from my side, also, I would like to thank all the speakers and presenters who have given, I think, a really broad range of different viewpoints on this issue. And I think it was really a useful discussion also to kind of deepen our understanding of this issue of access to finance at different levels, and also especially finance and other resources for responding to loss and damage. And I think it's a topic we are going to continue to work on. We would be happy to share with everyone who is participating today a recording of the webinar, but also a summary of the key takeaways, which we'll compile based on the notes and what was discussed. I saw the question also on the presentation. So we'll ask the presenters if they're okay to share the presentations. If that is the case, we could share them with everyone who is interested as well. And as Shiv was mentioned in the beginning, this is part of a broader project on this topic, which is supported by Bread for the World, for which we are very thankful also. And we're going to continue having activities around this. We had a webinar yesterday, we have today's webinar, and we're also looking to have a regional webinar for the African region, but probably after the SBs, so in July or later than that, where we kind of explore this question further. We'll also have some publications coming out on this, which we're currently having in the draft stage, which will be either out before SB 62 or maybe during or after. And we would really like to keep in touch with everyone who has taken part in this discussion today and who has contributed, but also with the broader community of everyone working on this from the government side as a negotiator, but also civil society, academia, researchers, and practitioners on the ground, and the communities who are vulnerable and at the front lines of the climate crisis. So yeah, with that, I really just want to say thank you from on behalf of Cyclone Trust to all the presenters, to our team also supporting the smooth functioning of this webinar and preparation and everything. And of course, to all the participants who have joined us today. And I think it's really great to see so many people online willing to discuss this issue of responding to loss and damage. So thank you very much. If you're going to be in Bonn, we're going to have event hub in the second week, which will have some events on different topics outside the venue at the gallery in Bonn Center. So we'll share some information on that as well. Some of these are on loss and damage as well. And yeah, with that, I would like to wish all of you a great rest of your day, great afternoon or evening or morning, wherever you are. And I hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Dennis.